welcome back to Cashflow Confidence. I'm Shelby Ashley, and I help business owners feel more confident about their cash flow. In last week's episode, I talked about why your profit does not equal what you're seeing in your bank account because profitability does not equal cash flow. And so I thought I would start maybe like a series on going over all of the things that do make up profitability and cash flow, starting at the top of the list. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit more about revenue and the kind of things that you can do to bring in more revenue into your business. So revenue is made up of a factor of how much you're selling, so your sales volume, your quantity of invoices, or whatever your sales transaction is, times what you're actually selling it by. And so if you're in a spot where you've got a ton of capacity and a lot of room where you can be out, hustling and bringing in more revenue, then that's where the sales volume comes in. So you obviously want to be getting in as much volume as you can. Eventually, you'll get to a point where your team is running at capacity. You really can't take on any more new sales without kind of tipping the boat. And when you're at that point, that's when you're going to want to raise your prices. And so I'm going to go into a little bit more of that today because a lot of business owners have a lot of hesitation when it comes to raising their prices. Obviously, because, you don't want to lose valuable customers and, you start to kind of question internally, is my product or service even worth this price? And so we're going to go into all of that today. So I'm going to talk about how to know when a price increase makes sense in your business and what red flags you need to watch for in your capacity and in your cash flow, and then what you need to get into place before you pull the trigger because, like I said, there just comes to a point where you literally can't even serve, one more customer without things kind of crashing and burning. And when that happens, if you do try to serve that extra customer or squeeze in that new work, you kind of let other customers fall off the table or your team gets burned out or it's just not good. It's not good all around. It's not worth the hassle to try and serve one more person when what you need to be doing to bring in more revenue is raising your prices. So when I say capacity, when you're operating at capacity, what do I mean by that? What that looks like is your team may be working, filling in every single hour that they're allotted to work. There's no downtime. Your own personal calendar is probably super full. You really don't have any more times for meetings. You may not even be, sleeping very well or able to take any vacation time. And there's just no room whatsoever in your business to add any new projects. And when this happens and revenue still isn't where you want it, I've seen a lot of times where business owners will bring on like a salesperson at this point, or they might even try and ramp up sales themselves, thinking that that's going to be the answer to more revenue. And let me tell you right now, it's not. If you are operating at capacity, bringing on a salesperson can be catastrophic because say this salesperson is wildly successful and let's say that they're just like mediocre at best. Okay, they're just mediocre, like they do a little better than, what you might be doing if you were doing it on your own. Even if they are just, marginally better than you are at sales, if they start bringing in more clients, what are you going to do with them? Think about your business right now and how it's operating and think about all the downtime that you probably don't have. If you were to take on more work right now, what would happen? If your conveyor belt is already full, you can't fit anything else onto it. So bringing on a salesperson when you're at this point in your business is not a good idea whatsoever. And so it's at this point that you're going to want to raise your prices. Okay, raise your prices. Yes, some clients and customers will fall off when you raise your prices. You might even find that as you go out on different sales meetings, you're going to get told no more often. That is completely normal. It does not mean that you have raised your prices too much. So figure out what would be a good price for you to hit the revenue target that you're wanting to reach and kind of back into, okay, if I don't have a single new client or customer, what do I need to charge now in order to meet that revenue target? And then set your price from there. And what that's going to do is, like I said, sales volume is going to fall off. And so this is going to free your team up a little bit because some customers will go away when you raise your prices. That's totally normal. That's totally fine. And then as you kind of go along at this new price, new customers are going to go in, and then it's going to kind of fill the backlog of the work that was lost. Okay, so we talked about capacity. The next kind of trigger or flag that you're going to see that lets you know it's time to raise your prices is your gross margin. And so what that means is what you're keeping off of each sale after your costs and that kind of thing are worked in. So if you're selling something that's like a $5,000 offer, but after your direct labor and your costs, you're only keeping like $1,200 of it, that's not good because that $1,200 now has to cover all of your overhead and things like that. And so if you're only keeping a very tiny percentage off of what you're making in each sale, that's not a good place to be. And you need to raise your prices such that what you're keeping off of each sale makes sense and can carry the rest of the business along and then still result in a profit for you. I'm going to go more into gross margin and kind of what goes into calculating the cost of your sales next week, because there are times when by raising your prices or increasing your revenue, you're going to increase your costs as well because it's variable, right? Like it depends on, what you're actually bringing in for revenue. And so next week, I'm going to talk more into that and how you can kind of keep that under control. But for right now, I just want to focus on revenue. So just make sure whatever you're keeping off of each of your sales, you can still run the business from and keep a profit from. The next piece I want to talk about when it comes to whether or not to raise your prices is your demand. And so when you think about demand, think about how many people are actually saying yes to your offer. When you look at your conversion rate, how many of your leads are you actually converting to sales? If you're converting 100% of your leads to a new sale, you need to raise your prices. Because if literally everybody you talk to is saying yes, you are priced too low. You should make it such that your conversion rate is running at like 80-ish%, 75%, because that way you're only taking in people who value your price and people who are going to say, nah, that's too expensive for me, or just, they can go on somewhere. Because you don't want everybody as a customer. You only want people who value your services. So when you decide that, yes, it is time for a price increase, what you can do is decide on a date that you're going to increase prices. Maybe it's 2 or 4 weeks out from now. Communicate it very, very clearly. So let your existing leads know that your pricing is going to increase on X date. That might get some purchases in the door if you kind of create that urgency. And then, that gives them a window to lock in at their current rate. And then make sure you're confident about it. Don't apologize for it. You're protecting the quality of your work and your team's time. Because if you don't ever raise your prices at any point in your business, how are you ever going to give people a raise, right? And so don't be apologetic about it. Just, raise your prices confidently. It's not a greedy thing. It's how you grow. Think about people that you have as vendors and suppliers, they raise their prices as well. So just to recap, your revenue is made up of what your price is multiplied by what your sales volume is. And so if you have a lot of room in your business, then you need to be focusing on sales volume right now. When you get to a point where you're operating at capacity or everybody you talk to is saying yes, they want your offer, then that's when you're in a position to raise prices. And it's going to kind of ebb and flow. So you're going to raise prices, and then that's going to make room for more sales. More sales is going to create more capacity. Then it's time to raise your prices again. That's kind of the cycle of how revenue goes. And so next week, I'm going to talk about your cost of sales because I want to make sure you're keeping everything off of what you're selling. All right, see you guys next week.